LCBN television broadcasts 24/7 on UK Freeview Channel 271, Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV, Android TV, Apple TV, Google TV, See Love World, LCBNTV.com, LifeComTV.com.
Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Conversations with Lydia. Today, I've got an amazing gentleman who's worked for years and years. I couldn't read out all his credentials. We're just going to visit psychiatry in Nigeria, where I'm sure we can visit it purposefully in Africa, just to find out how the work has been for him, how his journey has been, how acceptance, around mental health, and actually the difference that people like him who have pioneered it, I think, in Africa, what he can reflect over the years, how it was, how it is now, and where the future is. Please join me as we welcome Dr. Femi Olugbile. Good evening, sir. I hope I said your name properly.
That's all right. It's possible.
Thank you again. I sort of stopped on reading CVs while the guest was on, but I just permit me to do yours. His biography says he's the CEO of Synthesiz Consultants. They offer psychological health and consultancy services. He was also the chief medical director of Lagos State University Teaching Hospital and has served as permanent secretary of the Lagos State Ministry of Health. He's an advocate for mental health and currently runs a private clinical practice. You're a columnist for Business Day. I think your column is called The Human Angle or Human Angle. You have written 6 books, and I like the one of them that's The Lonely Men. I think we'll talk a little bit about that. So
that's
you have
all right.
6 books. Sort of a chapter in a professional textbook, and of course peer-reviewed, loads and loads of journals. So please, thank you again. I know I said thank you. I can only imagine how busy you've been, and you've been like exact. You gave us the date, the time, and you were even here before me. So welcome. Do you want to share a little bit about yourself? Something that's not in the bio.
Well, I've always been fascinated by the human mind, and I can't get enough of it. I think the most important part of the human being is the human mind. It's like the driver, and the rest of the human being is the vehicle. So if you take the driver out, although they are talking about driverless vehicles, the equivalent of that would be to take the brains of the driverless vehicle out, and then the vehicle becomes a shell, no matter how glamorous it is. So the human mind is extremely important. The human mind is the human being. The rest are just basically appendages. So anything,
just parts of it.
Anything that elevates the human mind elevates the human being. Anything that depresses or disturbs the human mind makes it impossible for the human person to function.
Okay. I think you sort of answered the question I was going to ask. I know when doctors are going to choose, if they're going to choose like a pathway, but how did you decide psychiatry? But from what you've just answered is that you're fascinated by the human mind. So was that something you always knew that you would sort of?
I've always been fascinated by the human mind. I've always been fascinated. Early on in my life, before I even went to medical school, I read up on Sigmund Freud, and I was very fascinated by the experiments he was doing, the stuff that he was writing, all the things that he was saying about psychoanalysis. Although I really didn't understand the concepts in those times. They appealed to me in that they gave the sense, which is true, which I confirmed to be true as I grow up, that the human mind is a vast treasure trove of resources. It's also a vast netherworld of negatives, of horrible, terrible things, murder, incest. So it's both a pathway to glory and a cesspool of sin. As I grew up, I got a local model. And when I got to medical school, I got a local model in Professor Aderi Lambo, who was the first Nigerian psychiatrist to get formal qualification. And he was associated with the growth and development of Arrow Neuropsychiatric Hospital in Abeokuta, and he acquired a worldwide reputation. Eventually, he became the Deputy Director General of the World Health Organization. So he's a man with a very large footprint, and he certainly was next to Sigmund Freud. He was my hero, and between them, they kept my interest going in psychiatry. Even through the days of medical school, I wasn't a very good medical student. Not that I didn't have the ability, but my heart was not really in it. I didn't like cutting and sewing people, which is what you're required to do in surgery. I really didn't like delivering babies, which is what you do, when you are doing obstetrics and gynecology. I never could, for the life of me, find the veins of tiny little babies, which you have to do when they are ill in pediatrics. So I was something of going through medical. I mean, I could get through all the hurdles, but what kept me going through it was that I knew at the end of the day I was going to specialize in psychiatry.
So you had a focus from the beginning. You had a focus. Yes. Okay, so how do you think psychiatry and mental health are received in Africa or Nigeria?
Well, it's pretty much how the story of psychiatry in Africa is very similar to the story of psychiatry in the whole world. Okay. At the very beginning, we were very good with descriptions, but basically that was all that we had. We could describe dementia precox for you, which was the equivalent of what we call schizophrenia, and now they could describe all sorts of conditions beautifully, but they had no effective remedies. The few remedies that there were in psychiatry in those early days were, for the most part, what we call impressionistic. It's the equivalent of people bleeding people, using leeches to bleed people when they felt, when they had pain in their leg and stuff like that. People didn't understand the science of it, so they just operated on the outside and did, things that these days would be considered bizarre. And then, so when I was training, some effective treatments had come to be, already. People had chlorpromazine and a few other remedies for major psychosis were already on the ground. Unlike in the early days when they had to give them injections of insulin or put them in coma or put them in stocks, they actually could give them things that could make them better. But the range was very narrow. So we were very high and very great on explanations, but very limited on effective remedies. So people had a view of psychiatry and mental health care generally as if it wasn't a science, that it didn't belong with the rest of medicine. It was really like voodoo. It was like we were practicing magical arts. But the more and more we understood the science of the human mind, the more akin to the rest of medicine psychiatry began to become. Okay, I mean, when you know not just the range of different types of schizophrenia, but you can actually have a specific pattern of presentation and a specific pattern of what is effective medication for this, and you begin to understand why that thing works the way it does. That brings it into the realm of science, and more that has been the journey over the past 20, 30 years. It's still a journey because we are not there yet. The human mind is still a mystery at the end of the day. You still don't know why anything works. You don't know if there are 1,001 different types of what we call psychotic illnesses, or whether, in fact, all illnesses are one illness. It depends on the stage of progression. We are not absolutely able to treat it. And then the major categories of illness, like the common ones, which are anxiety and depression, although we try to look on them as relatively minor, in quotes, illnesses, unrelated physiologically to the so-called major psychosis, where you lose reality, where people lose reality, lose touch with reality. We are not absolutely sure at the end of the day whether it's even one weakness that makes people liable to different things. So we are not sure of a lot of things, but hey, that's how all of science is. Although people think they are very specific in their knowledge. Knowledge advances, by serendipity. Sometimes you just stumble on things, but sometimes it takes careful, dedicated, single-minded pursuit over a lifetime of one tiny aspect of information or one tiny line of investigation to yield some major discovery. And we've had a few of those in psychiatry. So it's not voodoo anymore. And coming to the home scene, initially people had no faith, or not a lot of faith, in so-called modern mental health care, which is psychiatry. It is because it's an area of major interest for traditional practitioners. In the same way that the early people in Western mental health needed to figure out things and develop a language around the different manifestations of illness that the people had. Our people have developed their own way of describing the different realities that people face when you say they are mentally ill. But there are some distortions. The largest pool of manifestations of mental illness, such as anxiety and depression, are not recognized in traditional perception as illness at all. So that loses all. When they talk mental illness in the local context, they're talking psychotic illnesses, which is just that is people who behave abnormally or lose contempt and are not able, or talk nonsense or run after people, or talk to people that you can't see. Those ones are said to be psychotic. Okay, and they're a very, very small minority. So that has colored the perception of mental illness and mental health caregivers also, and led to the sense that, if you are mentally ill, you need to be locked up in a so-called asylum. We call them psychiatric hospital facilities. Yeah. Most people who are mentally ill, in fact, do not even will not go anywhere near a psychiatric institution, because there are people such as you and I who suffer from anxiety, who have palpitations, who are not able to sleep at night, who feel unaccountably depressed. They just find themselves crying. But when people come around, they can mop their eyes, they can go to the studio and do their recording. Okay? They just know that they are not functioning well. If they don't share the information with other people, they don't get to know. And that's the vast majority of mental illness. And as I've said, that vast majority is generally locked out of the perception in the traditional setting. It is the very small minority of mentally ill people, the ones who are going about naked on the street, who are shouting, or who are doing dramatic things, if I recognize that. There's a cautionary tale there. Those ones who have very dramatic manifestations actually respond very well to treatment, strangely. So if you actually paid attention to them and you treated them, you could see the guy who's going about naked and talking, shouting at the top of his voice because he's having hallucinations and responding to their. If you treat him effectively, within a few weeks, it could be as bright as rain, and you see him dressed in his three-piece suit and ready to go to his office. But that doesn't change the fact that it is that category of illness that is recognized generally locally as mental illness. The ones, I have a headache, I don't feel well, I feel unhappy type, generally don't see themselves as. And if you suggested to them that you need to go and see a therapist or a psychiatrist, often they will be offended. That was the scenario in which I came into practice. Again, that is work in progress, because our people have evolved. Things have happened. We've had the experience of COVID, for instance, and it has shaken everybody to their foundations. They've realized that, hey, I may not be mad in the conventional sense, but I'm not doing well. I'm not functioning well. Being at home with my wife and my 5 kids, I'm not having enough money to feed. It's driving me up the wall. It's making me want to hit at my children or hit at my wife. It's making me, not want to eat my food, not able to sleep at night. So people have a more direct and personal experience of mental illness, especially the more minor, more common ones. And we are able now to accept socially that they may occasionally, everybody virtually may occasionally need to have mental care intervention. So we've moved by leaps and bounds. We are not where we started from.
Okay. So, but I think prior to COVID, a lot of the young people, because if you go on social media, there's a lot of coverage on, what we call minor depressed, anxious feelings. But there was actually quite a generational gap, because parents would be saying to me, oh, my child told me this, and my child said this. When they mean child, they mean like youth, older children that are able to express. And the parents actually found it quite difficult to understand what they were talking about or where they were coming from. They would ask me questions like, did I do something wrong? Did I not raise them properly? They just look like they're not as robust, as we were. And I kept saying, no, this is a generation where we've opened up to our children to allow them to share things that they were struggling with. But from what you're saying now, the parents now have an idea of what it feels like because of COVID. The change that now, we were cramped in the house. They were feeling more pressure than normal, if it was monetary pressures or maybe actually just not doing anything, because not doing anything allows you to maybe feel all the feelings you were feeling before, but were able to function, because you were still able to get out of bed, and you were pushed by going into work. And now all of a sudden you're left with the feelings, because there isn't work, to hurry up or help you wear the mask. The other day I was having this conversation, and a friend asked me, do we all wear masks? I said, yes, we all wear masks in some way. How we present. We go home and we're one person, at work we're another, social functions we're one. So it sort of helped us, take off the veil, I think, a bit, and really examine our feelings. And a lot of people, yes, were experiencing a lot of symptoms, which I think they had before, underlining, but COVID sort of just pushed it out. I would assume you discovered that, because you talked about it even before it came up, that people's behaviors had changed.
No, well, it's just, the way it works is that the whole COVID panoply was just another package of stress. And that's what stress is like, just to you. So stress is like a common final pathway to psychological decomposition. I mean, if everybody has a threshold, and no matter how sedate or calm you are, if the stress that you are subjected to is ratcheted up sufficiently, you will find yourself acting in strange ways. After some time, you'll find yourself having a breakdown, having an emotional, also called nervous breakdown. At some time, the nature of that will depend on your natural vulnerabilities, maybe your family history, and a whole lot of other, your constitution, your own innate constitution, and your experience growing up. So the COVID experience is not a unique thing directly, although it brought a whole lot of really confluent negatives in its baggage. First of all, there was even the fear of death, the fear that you yourself will catch COVID. The reality of seeing people that you knew, perhaps members of your family, going down and being ill in a way that you hadn't experienced, that you hadn't fathomed before. Sometimes you watching relatives die and not being able to go close to them, not being able to even bury them in the conventional sense. You say that kind of trauma never leaves you. So the whole COVID experience was trauma packaged in a unique way. There was also the fact that you had no control over issues. You didn't know how long it was going to last. These are the things that help people to manage stress. Okay, I'm sentenced to staying in this house with this terrible person, but hey, it's going to end tomorrow. I have control over time, over the time. Okay, whether ending tomorrow means that I get up and go to work, or I go to another place, or that person leaves. I seeing a limit, so the so-called light at the end of the tunnel helps me to manage, helps me to contain that stress. If it's an endless possibility of a negative stress that is open to that you have no control over, there's a helplessness that you feel that makes you want to give up. There's something called learned helplessness. There's a concept of psychology called learned helplessness, where which was developed from some funny studies that people did, several decades ago. Where when you did certain negative things to a hen, it will move to escape from that stimulus to another spot. After a while, if you started to do the same thing at that same spot, you jump back to the previous one. After a while, it will, if you started to apply it at both spots, after a while, the thing was just still carrying on the same spot because it's developed learned helplessness. It realizes that there's nothing it can do that can take it away from the pain or the shock, electric shock that you are giving to it. And that's something that is applicable to human beings too. When they become truly powerless, that is irrespective of what you do or what you don't do, the same thing will persist. It's a terrible situation to be in. As a race, we generally become more psychologically sensitive, and that the same goes for us. So COVID was just the most recent, shared trauma that we had. We've been evolving in a more psychologically conscious way over the years, over the decades. It's certainly pleasant to find that, there's a whole plethora of persons who are interested in psychological issues. There are many people who've opened up shop as therapists, although that itself becomes a problem because you need to standardize. I mean, you need to know what people are doing. Sometimes, if you can claim you may genuinely wish to help someone or other people through therapy, and you may end up damaging them. So it's not necessarily it's like taking medication. Every medication has side effects. Therapy has administered in the wrong way or ended in the wrong way has negative possibilities that can live with the person or have life-damaging effects. So you are seeing people become more psychologically aware and more interested in their own mental health care. And other people's mental health care is a good and pleasant thing for a psychiatrist who's been advocating that all through his career. But it also carries the risk. I'm also aware of the risk, which makes it necessary that we should develop mechanisms for standardizing so that not everybody can just open up shop and say they are doing therapy. If you are doing therapy, what type of therapy are you doing? Who's supervising you? What school do you belong to? What are the checks and balances? Who could people appeal to if they feel they've been damaged by you? Who's looking over your shoulder to see that you are not just cooking up some mumbo jumbo and taking people's money? It's very difficult to do. The bodies that are formally trained in mental health care and formal therapy are the body of psychiatrists and the body of psychologists. Okay, so those ones could exert some control, but their control, for the most part, only has to do with their members, with the people who have the appropriate qualifications. But most people who are out there in the public space, including on the internet, in social media, claiming that they are doing therapy, actually are not psychiatrists or even formally trained psychologists. Some people just go for some funny diploma somewhere, or learn some smart speak and begin to throw it about and impress people on television shows, and people come to them. And if they don't help those people, at least they shouldn't harm them. Do no harm is actually a major requirement in medicine. That you may be an incompetent surgeon and you may not know your way, how to navigate your way around this surgical problem. The best thing is to get somebody who's able to do it. But in the process, don't go and do something that will kill that person or will harm that person. So do no harm is a major thing. And even in psychological sciences, it's important that we emphasize that therapy can be harmful. It's good that more people are seeing the need for therapy. But the cautionary tale is that people should only seek help from people who are appropriately trained for the purpose.
what you're saying is so apt, because a lot of times too, when I go through the pages on social media and some of the things, I actually worry that people are sitting in front of people talking about themselves, and they're not held or contained properly, and it's doing probably more damage than it is doing good. So I guess the warning is, if you're going to go to a therapist, you're going to go to somebody who claims to be a therapist, please make sure, check out that they are qualified, check out that they are managed or supervised properly, or they belong to a good enough a body that can help you. Because sometimes in getting help, in being desperate to get help, we might end up being more damaged than we are. So COVID, we all hope is on its way out. What do you feel as kind of the long-term effects mentally for us all, actually, because it's something that we've all suffered in one way or the other?
Well, for the most part, people are going to get up and go once they feel that they've got their lives back. But again, nobody has had this experience. Even the way it's going itself is so unique in our experience. It's not as if, okay, somebody has told you that by X amount of time, all the targets that have been set as exit dates have been missed. If you've been listening to the news, it's just only Austria is going into full national lockdown again next Monday. Germany is contemplating doing another full national lockdown. I mean, these are the people whom you thought had managed these things very expertly, using the best science, and then the thing itself has got interpolated with politics of right wing and left wing. And look at what is happening in America. It's become almost like a human rights thing, whereas it's a straightforward public health matter. You hear intelligent, otherwise knowledgeable people making a case that there's not, even now, that there's nothing like COVID-19 that is a scam, and that that the vaccines are meant to put the mark of the devil on you. And they are saying it actively, not just in the public space that is occupied by the most ignorant people, but by people who should know better. So there's a problem. Nothing, to the best of my knowledge, no illness has been so conflated with political divisions, and even and occupied the first lines between people, and lent itself to rumor mongering and lack of faith in the normal remedies of science, as COVID-19 has done. So it's not just a public health issue, it's a psychological threat to humanity, because it's affected us in ways that it's affected our most fundamental beliefs about ourselves and about our science. We've lost the unanimity. I mean, if you everybody understood that if you were in a smallpox, if there's a risk of having smallpox, it's okay, people should get vaccinated to prevent smallpox. Even in the most anti-vaxxer societies, people realize the need to get inoculations for their children against common childhood illnesses. But this one just seems to have affected. So it's not just an illness like other illnesses. It's affected us even in our thinking. Okay, it made us lose faith in our leaders and in what people tell us, in what the most authoritative people in society tell us. So it's going to take us some time to get out of that bind mentally. With specific reference to the lockdown and all of that, hopefully, that is for most places that is beginning to ease now. Nigerians go about their business. They've been told that in public spaces they should still be wearing masks and face masks and doing social distancing. They observe that in the breach. Nigeria, there's a very strong anti-conformist strain within our people for some reason. There's a lot of denial, even concerning the reality of the thing. But that also plays into the political divisions that we have on the ground. It's amplified by the problems that we already have on the ground, and then it's very, very difficult to find. But people still come down. The ICUs, so I've not been fully shot. Maybe there are still patients going in as we speak. But we thankfully have not had the explosion that was predicted for us in this part
Yes.
of the world. I think it's
Yes.
only South Africa and perhaps Egypt that have been very seriously affected on the African continent. So it made us look not as bad as we might otherwise have looked. When you look at the actual figures, I think the percentage of Nigerians that have been vaccinated, I don't think it's not certainly not up to 5%.
Yeah.
So if a country that is 70% vaccinated is going back, or if Austria that is 70% vaccinated is going back into lockdown next Monday because they are having, because of the threat posed to the rest of the society by those 30% who are not vaccinated. What would have happened in Nigeria, where 95% or more than 95% are not vaccinated, if the same logic held? And it's not as if we've done, although we've been praised, it's not really that we've done anything fantastic, exceptionality. It is just probably that certain things in our environment and in, that we've grown up with have made us not as vulnerable to this condition as we otherwise might have been. But it's affected us psychologically, but not as much physically as it might have done. People who are projecting that dead bodies will be picked up on the streets of Lagos and Kano and Kaduna. That has not materialized, which does not mean we should disparage the condition or minimize it, because we've still lost thousands of people. People have died. People have been debilitated by this thing, and there's a requirement still to be vigilant and to not deny the science, okay, and not avoid taking the public health measures that are required even now to keep us all well. People have lost their jobs. The whole workspace has been reconfigured for some. Even as we speak, many civil servants, the lower order civil servants, are still not going to work or working. They claim to be working from home. In reality, they're not doing any work because their offices and their outputs are not configured in such a way as to make working from home, a possible thing, as it might have been in a well-functioning private entity. So maybe what that shows us, on the other hand, is that we have too many civil servants. Maybe we have too many people doing two field jobs, and maybe that's a wake-up call that we may need to reconfigure and realign the whole of the public workspace in the first instance, and to look at the numbers, okay? Because it's not as if anything has collapsed since all of those people stopped showing up physically for work, going just on the payday to collect their pay, or having their money remitted to their banks, as the case may be. But that's an aside. It is a long, lingering trauma rather than a short, sharp trauma that people can then begin to recover from. It is with us one way or another. At the peak of the experience, we set up telephone lines, hotlines for people to call when they felt distressed, when they felt unable to cope. Despite the fact that I said we've become more psychologically sensitive and more ready to discuss our mental health issues, there's still a certain reticence that even with the anonymity of a telephone hotline, many people will still prefer to suffer their depression or their sadness or their sense of failure or futility or their sense of hopelessness privately rather than discuss it, even with somebody that they cannot see, okay, whom they know is sympathetic. So we still have that reticence.
That's a cultural
but
thing?
People did come up. It is a cultural thing.
And
especially for the males. In the male, the male is expected to maybe be strong and just get on with things. That you cannot be seen to cry, and you cannot admit to crying privately or internally. But hey, I think people again, those are where we are coming from. We are getting better, and people are unburdening themselves and learning more and more that it is okay to admit that you are not Superman or Superwoman. And
well, I think it before we go there, because that was going to be my next question, talking about how genders respond to things that have happened. But I think, from my experience in the UK, at the peak of COVID, people literally used to avoid people. You would go and then people wouldn't want to touch you. And then when we got to like 70% of people being vaccinated, I think now in the UK, it's almost like a free-for-all. Everybody's back on the streets. Now we just look at people who wear masks like, why are you still wearing the mask? Are you a non-vaxxer? Are you a vaxxer? So I think it, as you said, I think for me, that was the most significant thing that happened, where we were now afraid of one another, you know, from one human to human. Everybody was afraid to have contact, physical contact. You know, in the UK, it was quite severe. So I couldn't come to your house. You couldn't come to mine. There were times people would come and visit. They'll have to sit in the cars. And I think if anything would stay with me, you know, past this COVID times, were those real times where we were quite isolated. If people had families, yes, it was intense, but you had people. But with people who were living alone, it was really, really a difficult time. And I know a few people who were working frontline and then caught COVID. And they couldn't go to the hospitals. Their families couldn't come to them. And, you know, they were leaving food like outside the door, medicine outside the door. It was really, and
the sort of thing that used to happen with lepers.
Yes, exactly. So, and even at times they didn't have the physical strength to go to the door to even get the food. You know, some had really bad headaches. I'm sure you will have some of the symptoms, and they were just in their homes, you know, by themselves, and everybody was like, you couldn't have physical contact with one human to another. Even walking on the streets or standing in the shops, everybody stood that 2 meters. And I think for me, that I'm not sure, you know, I still haven't sort of reconciled, like, how did we get to that place? But as we all know, it was and sometimes I feel some of it, as you say, was political. Some of it was, you know, it was like they were feeding the fear, because every day you turned on the news, we had huge numbers of people who'd been diagnosed, numbers of people who died. So for a long time, it was really fearful, you know, when not so much in Nigeria, I know, but in the UK, it was really bad. And it was horrible to see the streets empty, you know, everybody was home. So it was quite an isolating time, I think, for all of us. So let's go to men and women. Who is more forthcoming? You know, even though, you know, we also have the myth of the strong Black woman, yeah, who really takes everything on. So do you feel she's more permitted than the strong Black male to cry?
I think when it suits her, she can use the advantage of agenda and let it hang out. And she can still be the one who looks after the children and runs the single. Just as in the case in a lot of African American homes, where the woman has to be which we are hoping will evolve in a positive direction rather than become more extreme. A lot of the women are the ones who, you know, there's no doubt that over the past 30, 40 years, a lot of the women are the ones who have, you know, brought up the children in single parent homes, and they've had to be strong for everybody. But as I've said, although they couldn't break down as in go to pieces, the general pattern has been that they've not felt obliged to hold back when it came to emotions. They could cry and be all over the place, and the next moment they're drying their eyes because they have to go to work, to their third work of the day at 6 p.m. Otherwise, the children will not be fed the next day, that sort of thing. So you could be strong as a woman and still be emotional. Mm-hmm. For the male, you know, traditionally the pattern seemed to be that they suffered that psychological torment in silence, and then acted out the script, you know, by doing other things, like taking drugs, by showing undue aggression, that even those manifestations of badness, in quotes, so many of them were evidence that they were you know, suffering torment inside. In the same way that a child who is a teenager or a young child who is suffering from depression may not say, I'm feeling sad, or even be crying, maybe having abdominal pain and not being able to sleep. And you think the pain is the issue, but that is the manifestation, that's the language in which so people have different ways of manifesting. Yeah, there are strong patterns across gender lines traditionally, but there's a lot of blurring. And lately with Me Too, we are and other gender blurring or gender equalization moves that have been taking place. The traditional male reticence and macho has also itself become something like an antique, or is becoming something like an antique item, and people, feel free to express themselves and express their weakness and uncertainties and irresolution. Whether that is good for society or not is another matter. I mean, it depends on where you're coming from. Because again, that becomes political. It is part of what the polarizing difference between the so-called right wing and the left wing in a place like the USA, for instance. The people who support Donald Trump and including the almost, how should I put it, irrational beliefs that are clearly counter intellectual. They are motivated. Many of them are motivated by this sense that we must maintain the traditional polarities. That a man is a man, a woman is a woman, and you must be tough, and macho. The woman must be soft and subservient and mustn't show up too much. I don't know. So psychosocial things are taking place at the individual level. They're also taking place at the general society level, and the battles are being influenced by political development. In fact, the battles themselves are influencing political developments. For instance, many people are saying that if a person like the first president of America comes back to power in America, and it was thought to be a very distant possibility previously, but now people are beginning to fear that it may not be as distant as that. It's not on the basis of his personal popularity, but on the fact that it's just like a front for some of these unresolved psychosociological issues in the gender, what should be the right relationship between the two genders is a major item in those divisions. So yes, there's an evolution towards everybody being more human and less defined by their gender, but it's also coming at a certain cost, and there's a lot of uncertainty. People often don't know which way to go on what issues. They would like to be very equal and to be very open and to incorporate some traditional feminist, some traditional feminine traits into the male psyche to make it a more balanced one. We like the children to not prejudge that your little boy will play football, but also challenge him with cookery and stuff like that. You would like to do that, but there's a conflict because it is the mind of people doing all of that uniformizing, both at the basic growing up and tutoring level and the adult level. The minds of people are not fully at peace in the sense that they're necessarily doing the right thing, or the society itself is necessarily evolving in the right. That's uncertainty. There's ambivalence. Even while all of us are mouthing the woke and generally politically correct, if you like, ideologies.
But like what you are saying is like that. Well, I don't know whether I'll call it theory or the ideal of the man being the man hunter gatherer. That seems to be quietly being eroded.
Fading.
And I guess I always have this discussion when people say, so we may not have as well have educated our daughters, because we kind of educate them, and then at some point, we're not.
We want to lower the expectations.
Yes, lower the expectations and tell them, okay, you still have to cook, clean, and mind the house on top of going to work. So I'm like, we should have just stayed at home and cooked and cleaned, because now we don't have the
perfect situation. So even when we are doing the right thing, we feel ambivalent about it. We are not 100% certain in
Yeah,
our
we're
mind.
not
That's
certain.
why nationalistic, polarized ideologies are finding very, very fertile ground in the minds of people.
Yeah.
Because people are really not sure. They're doing it, okay? And even if you doubt it, you cannot say, you cannot strongly come against. I mean, nobody will say anything against what you said about, educate your, I educate my children. So I'm not doing, but if people have doubts, it's very difficult for them to express it
Yes.
in public. There's an intimidating influence that is now the intimidation of the righteous, if you like. There's a good way of thinking, a correct way of thinking, and all of us must think that way. And people who don't think that way must be punished. They must be driven from their academic positions. They must lose their positions. If historical sexual abuse or historical statements against people that you shouldn't say things against, whether it is women or whatever, can be punished 20 years on. Okay, and you can lose your perch as MD and CEO of Coca-Cola or something because of what happened. So while it's general, everybody recognizes as a movement generally in a good direction because we want to have a more equal, more open, more egalitarian world. Then there's a lot of uncertainty underground which is not being overtly expressed out of fear, incidentally, which causes uncertainty, causes ambivalence, and could also be associated with mental illness. Could be and often is associated with mental illness. But ambivalence actually is an attribute of depression. It's a classical description of ambivalence. I want to go to the door and open it, and then I stop halfway and I come back, and then I go, and I can do that 20, 30 times. That's ambivalence carried to an extreme extent. And a lot of us have ambivalence, not just about things in our personal lives, but about things that are going on in our society. I mean, there's no definitive authority that can resolve it for us. You cannot say, this person, let me listen to him, and he has the received version, and I follow that and I shut out everything else. Even the Pope or the Mahdi or whatever, becomes not the ultimate divine authority of what is good or what is right, even to the people that follow them, because they have their worries. It's a strange world.
Well, I guess as our minds have opened up into maybe bigger possibilities, we're sort of taking chances and risks that maybe we weren't doing maybe a couple of years ago, and life is changing. It's difficult, as you said, for people who have one way of thinking to now open their minds again to accept change, because I think change is one of the most difficult things a human can go through. Just even thinking about it is one thing, accepting it is one, and then doing it, is another, because what's wrong with me being the boss or the man being superior to the woman? All of a sudden now you're coming up with this concept that, no, I've had it wrong for 50 years or 60 years, and we're equals, or she can do what I can do
better than me, which is true sometimes.
Yes, which is true sometimes. I was having this discussion with a couple of young men, and one of them said men are superior, and by the end of the conversation he was saying, but women are sly. They pretend they pretend, and then they get you to do what it is they
rule you from behind.
So I thought, from one point you always superior, and then all of a sudden we are smarter than you. Was going, yes, because you people just manipulate us to do what it is. I said, yes, we don't have the physical strength, but we have another strength which we usually play on, which is what you were talking about, that a woman who is strong is also able to express emotions, whether it's anger, whether it's tears, whether she shouts a lot. She's doing something to manage her frustration, whilst the man may not have the opportunity to cry.
Doesn't have the same range.
Doesn't have the same range. He's well, most of the time he can be angry and shout a lot, but that's that I think is kind of acceptable when a man feels, or people just accept that he's angry. I don't think they use that word to describe him, but they will just say he's difficult, or shouts a lot, but nobody actually will attach that word to him and say, oh, he's an angry man, he just shouts a lot. It's just he shouts a lot, or he's difficult. So I guess men get will I say better label than a woman? A woman can be called angry, she can be called bitter, she can be called bossy or manly. Or
there are all sorts of stereotypes and that people form, and that people have to live down. And many, to compound that, some of the stereotypes live in the minds of the individuals themselves, and then they find, so their life experience is a process of living down that. For instance, if there's a woman who's promoted to be CEO of a big company where there are a lot of men, she really has to be very mentally stable for her own expectations not to affect her behavior. Because one of the things that can happen, you can get paranoid, you can start to read meanings into they probably don't like me already anyway, or they're going to think, why am I, their boss? Why, when they think themselves better, suitable or not suitable for the position. So it's not just what people do, it's your perception of what they do that affects your behavior. So you can be reacting to things that are not there at an extreme, and then inducing change or influencing the behavior of those people by your own hostility or your expectation of hostility from them. So the human mind is a very intricate thing, and since we don't live in the desert, and none of us, unless you're a monk, you isolate yourself in a monastery, we have to interact with people. Life itself is a back and forth thing between us and the rest of the world, and it's not always a story of other people doing things to us. It also includes our own carrying expectations that affect what people then do to us. So it can be very, very complicated. On the other hand, you could actually be going into a place where people truly are hostile, and if you are going with a rose-tinted pair of spectacles, thinking that the world is good, everybody accepts, they know that I'm super qualified, and they're hostile to you, then it can affect the work and it can affect you too. So there are all sorts of scenarios. The real thing that you would advise a person in terms of how to deal with this psychology is to be as genuine as possible, and not to read meaning that is genuine, both in terms of sifting their perception of other people and not writing stuff into those perceptions. Is looking away because he doesn't like me, or is sniffing because of what I just said. You can erase those from your mind. But if they are really hostile to you, it will show anyway. On the other hand, if you think they love you where they don't love you, because you are wearing rose-tinted glasses and you think it's one world and everybody is going to be fine. Again, you are using your own, we don't call it prejudice this time, you are using your own unrealistic expectations and foisting them on the other people. And that is not who they are or what they are or what they want to be. So it is your clear and open mind really should be interacting with the genuine essence of what is happening in your environment for you to have a wholesome interaction. And often we don't get that right. Often that leads us into psychological distress. So the illness, if you call it that, can reside within you. It can reside in the nature, the accuracy of the nature of your interaction with the environment, whether that environment is your family or your work or whoever, or other people that you are required to be, or society at large.
Okay. We're sort of coming to time, so I'll sort of take us back to where we started. Now, somebody is listening to all you've said, especially at the beginning when we're talking about, getting help. Now, it's sometimes a difficult sell Because I get it all the time. People ask me, do you mean people come and sit in front of you and talk about their problems? What do they talk about? Not to talk of when somebody's struggling with, an illness that needs medication and needs your kind of help. And I know there's a lot of resistance in people actually admitting, though, as we talked about it, that COVID has caused some kind of mind shifts and people are understanding. But what can you leave us with that will get people to know that actually it's okay, as they say, it's okay not to be okay, and how they can access help?
It is okay not to be okay. That's the truth of the matter. In Nigeria, as in most of the rest of Africa, up to 90% of people who have treatable and recognizable mental illnesses do not seek help, not to talk of getting it. So the matter of whether they get it does not even arise. They do not seek it. Disproportionately, the people who are brought into help tend to be that minority category that I told you about, the people who are psychotic. That is the ones who are out of touch with that. Of course, somebody is behaving bizarrely, whether that person is a member of your family or in your neighborhood, you have a burden interest, whether you consider it because of your own security or just because it's very unsightly, to help them into care. Okay, so they get a better deal in a sense. They get more urgent attention. But unfortunately, that means that a large percentage of society, up to 20%, sometimes more, in COVID times, it probably will be going dizzily near 40% of people will be like walking wounded people. That is, people suffering psychological disability, psychological limitations, being anxious perpetually to a point where it becomes a matter of continuous distress with them, and not thinking about seeking help, either because they don't know that help is available, or they don't know the nature of what they have. They don't see it as an illness, or they are inhibited by their cultural prejudices and the role that the way the society around them views the whole issue of that they having the first step of having to admit that you have a problem is just that one step that they are not able, is just one step too far for them. So they suffer in silence. I call them the walking wounded, and it's a very large population. So you find a lot of people working in offices, whether in private sector or public sector, and they're underperforming. Okay, there's something that the employee assistance practitioners call presenteeism. A lot of people go to the office, or they say they are working from home, and they are doing rubbish. Okay, because they're there just to show up, because they do not want not to be there, because that might cost them. They may lose their jobs or what. So so presenteeism manifests in the sense that I go there to fulfill righteousness, but where I'm supposed to perform 100% in order for this organization to thrive, maybe I'm performing 40% or 30%. So who suffers? I'm suffering, okay, because because I feel there's an internal distress component to this. I know that things are not right with me, but I'm not the only person suffering. The organization, that organization could actually be the nation. So what I said about people going to the office could mean the head of state or some important functionaries of state, and those statistics that I gave apply equally to them.
Okay. Yes,
that means they are doing their jobs, but they are sub-performing in their jobs, and then who suffers? All of us suffer as a result of that presenteeism, or that refusal to acknowledge the reality of psychological distress and the availability of help for mitigating it, of making it go away entirely. But at least, the first step being that it needs to be recognized, and then help sort for it. So everybody suffers as a result of the still existing and the still prevalent denial and refusal, whether active denial, whether denial on the basis of ignorance, whether denial on the basis of cultural attitudes, the very active. So the two things that we're suffering from, an active denial around the reality of mental illness, which makes people not seek help, except when you have a breakthrough situation where everybody is really down, like in the COVID one. The other bit that I'd like to leave you with actually is the misrepresentation of mental illness, which tends to focus on the psychotic minority end of people who have dramatic illnesses. And unfortunately, you get a lot of representation of that in the dramatic arts, in the social media, in the films, that in Nollywood, and that's a shame, really, because it tends to reinforce stigma around mental illness. So when you now tell somebody you need to go and see a psychiatrist because he's depressed, it tells you, are you saying I'm mad? He's connecting
what he's seen
to his own reality, and on the basis of that, denying himself the acknowledgement of the possibility that he could need help.
Okay, sir. Thank you for your time, and it's been, I'm sure, one of the most informative programs we've had. Where can people find you, or maybe buy your books?
Well, I don't know. I run a practice, and I also do a lot of therapeutic interventions online. Okay, you'll find that that's one of the gains, if in quotes, of the COVID experience, because it opened up that possibility, which has always been there, but which had not previously, even within the profession, been recognized as a valid alternative in many cases to the face-to-face physical person-to-person encounter, and it's every bit as helpful in many situations. It's not appropriate for every situation, but it is. It can be helpful.
Okay.
Well, the point of contact, probably my telephone number, which is available to you, which can be scrolled, and then my email address, which is my contact. I don't know if you want me to write it, or what do you want us to do?
No, I'm sure if people put you up, put your name up, they'll be able to find you, but it's good to know that.
They can always get my references online.
And, if they're stuck, they can always contact me, and I'll pass them on. So thank you very much for your time again, sir. It's been really
a pleasure having this chat with you. I've enjoyed it myself.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Bye.
What an informative evening. We touched on many aspects: psychiatry, treatment, denial, acceptance, stereotyping, COVID and its impacts. Till you see me again next week, take care. My name is Lydia Khalil. Thank you for watching and listening.
LCBN television broadcasts 24/7 on UK Freeview Channel 271, Roku TV, Amazon Fire TV, Android TV, Apple TV, Google TV, See Love World, LCBNTV.com, LifeComTV.com.